5 minutes after my sister posted that photo, I shut my laptop and called my lawyer. That's the short version. The long version starts on a Monday morning at Fort Liberty. I was in uniform sitting at my kitchen counter reviewing a budget worksheet before heading into the office. My phone buzzed. I glanced down and saw my sister Samantha's name at the top of my notifications. She had posted a photo outside a Tesla dealership in Austin. Brand new Model S. Red ribbon on the hood. Big smile. My parents standing beside her like they'd just won the lottery. The caption read, "Hard work. No handouts. Self-made millionaire. Bought Dad his dream car today." I stared at that line longer than I should have. No handouts. Self-made. Underneath the photo, my dad commented, "Proud of you, Sam. This is what happens when you take real risks." My mom added, "Some people save pennies. Some people build empires." That wasn't subtle. I'm the one in the army. I'm the one who saves pennies. My husband Ethan walked into the kitchen with coffee, glanced at my phone, and read the caption, without saying a word. He didn't need context. He'd been part of this from the beginning. He set his mug down and asked one question. Did she respond to the notice? No. 10 days earlier, our attorney in Austin had sent Samantha a formal notice of breach. It outlined irregular transactions flagged during a quarterly audit transactions that violated the secured debt agreement tied to the $3 million I had invested in her company 6 years ago. $3 million. Not a gift. Not a donation. A secured convertible debt agreement filed properly with the state of Texas. UCC filing included. Audit rights. Capital recall clause. The whole thing drafted by lawyers, not siblings. The notice required her to provide documentation for specific vendor payments within 10 business days. The deadline was that morning. She hadn't responded. Instead, she posted a Tesla. Ethan leaned against the counter. Call Bennett. Bennett was our attorney in Travis County. He had already prepared the paperwork for a temporary restraining order if Samantha continued moving funds after the breach notice. We weren't improvising. We were following procedure. I picked up my phone and stepped outside onto the patio. Bennett answered on the second ring. Calm as always. She didn't cure the breach, I said. I saw the Instagram post, he replied. You're not the only one who follows her. Is the bank ready? Yes. If we file this morning, the compliance hold goes into effect immediately. Access to the business account will be suspended pending review. No drama. No flashing red lights. Just a compliance hold triggered by active litigation. Proceed, I said. There was no anger in my voice. Just confirmation. Inside, Ethan had already opened his laptop. He logged into the investor portal for the company account. As secured creditor, I still had limited oversight access. Enough to monitor. Not enough to operate day-to-day transactions. That authority had been delegated to Samantha years earlier on the condition she followed the agreement. He refreshed the dashboard. Funds are still there, he said. For now. At 9:42 a.m. Central Time, Bennett filed the TRO request electronically in Travis County. Within minutes, the bank's legal compliance team flagged the business account due to pending litigation and breach allegations. That triggered an automatic suspension of outgoing transactions until review. That's how it works in real life. Not with a dramatic button. With paperwork. Meanwhile, in Austin, my sister was probably still smiling. I didn't call her. I didn't text her. I didn't comment on the post. I muted the thread and drove to base. By 10:15 a.m. Central Time, Samantha was standing at a Tesla showroom counter handing over her company card. I know the time because later we received the transaction log. The first swipe returned. Transaction declined, refer to issuer. The sales associate tried again. Same result. The account had been placed under review. Outgoing transactions suspended. It wasn't loud. No alarms, no shouting, just a quiet moment where a machine refused to cooperate. According to the transaction record, she attempted a third time before stepping aside. There were other customers in the showroom. Weekend-level traffic. Not a crowd, but enough witnesses. At 10:23 a.m., Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and showed me the screen while I was parked outside battalion headquarters. Attempted charge declined. No celebration. No high fives. Just confirmation. I walked into the building, saluted the duty officer, and took my seat at my desk like it was any other Monday. About 20 minutes later, my phone lit up. Sam. I let it ring. It rang again. Then my mom. Then my dad. I silenced the phone and slid it into my drawer. In the army, if something is urgent, people don't call twice. They call your commander. No one called my commander. That told me everything. Around noon, Bennett emailed confirmation that the TRO hearing had been scheduled for later that week. The bank would maintain the compliance hold until judicial review. This wasn't revenge. It was enforcement. At 12:17 p.m., Sam finally sent a text. "What did you do?" I read it once and locked my screen. 6 years earlier, when she was facing bankruptcy, I had wired $3 million from my investment account to stabilize her collapsing branding agency. I had done it after returning from Kuwait. After months of 12-hour days in desert heat. After reinvesting gains from a cybersecurity startup I'd backed as a lieutenant. It wasn't military pay that built that account. It was risk patience and good timing. She called herself self-made. The bank records said otherwise. At 1:05 p.m., another text came through. "The dealership says the account is frozen. Fix this." Frozen. Interesting choice of words. I went back to my spreadsheet. Battalion budget numbers don't care about family drama. Columns still have to balance. My phone buzzed again. "I swear if you're behind this." I powered it off. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. Meetings, emails, a review of quarterly projections. No explosions, no screaming. Just silence on my end. At 4:30 p.m., as I walked back to my car, Ethan called. "She's trying to move funds from a secondary account," he said. "Compliance flagged that too." "Good." There was a pause. "You okay?" "I'm fine." And I was. Because this wasn't about a car. It wasn't about Instagram. It was about a contract signed 6 years ago, filed with the state of Texas, and ignored when it became inconvenient. She built an image. I built documentation. And that morning documentation won. I kept my phone powered off until I pulled into the driveway. Ethan was already home, sitting at the kitchen table with a folder open in front of him. Not dramatic, not tense, just organized. That's how we handle problems in this house. He slid the folder toward me. Inside were copies of the original agreement from 6 years ago, the secured convertible debt contract, the UCC filing confirmation, the board consent form, every signature dated and notarized. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like a file audit. 6 years earlier, the situation looked very different. I had just returned from Kuwait. 12 months deployed. Finance operations supporting contracting units. Long days, hotter nights, and more spreadsheets than most civilians ever want to see in a lifetime. When I landed back in North Carolina, I expected to decompress, maybe take leave. Instead, I got a phone call from my mom. "Samantha's in trouble." That was the phrase. In trouble. Her branding agency in Austin had expanded too fast. She leased a bigger office, hired aggressively, took on debt assuming revenue would keep climbing. It didn't. A major client backed out. Another delayed payment. Vendors started demanding cash up front. The SBA lender sent notice of default. She wasn't weeks from discomfort. She was weeks from collapse. I flew to Texas on my own dime. When I walked into her office, the place looked polished. Glass conference room. Branded wall logo. Employees trying to act normal. But I've worked around enough budget shortfalls to recognize panic when I see it. She showed me the numbers. Accounts payable stacked up. Payroll barely covered. Personal guarantee tied to the SBA loan. If the company went under, she would be personally liable. My parents were already emotionally involved. They believed in her vision. They believed in her drive. They believed she just needed support. No one asked what support looked like for me. By that point, my investment portfolio had grown significantly. Years earlier, as a lieutenant, I had invested $40,000 into a cybersecurity startup started by a former academy classmate. Most people thought it was a gamble. It paid off. The company was acquired in 2018. I reinvested carefully index funds, defense sector stocks, municipal bonds. No flashy moves, no lifestyle inflation. That's what my mom calls saving pennies. When Samantha asked for help, I didn't wire money out of emotion. I asked for financial statements, tax returns, loan agreements, vendor contracts. I treated her like any other distressed business seeking capital. She didn't like that at first. "You're my sister." "Yes," I told her, "which is why we're doing this properly." Ethan flew down that weekend. He reviewed everything line by line. Cash flow projections, debt structure, client contracts. He didn't care about her brand identity, he cared about risk. The final number needed to stabilize operations and restructure debt was $3 million. That would pay off high-interest obligations, restore vendor confidence, and provide runway for 12 months. $3 million isn't casual money for anyone, even when you have it. Before a single dollar moved, our attorney drafted a secured convertible debt agreement under Texas law. The terms were clear. I would provide $3 million as secured debt, not equity. The loan would convert under specific conditions, but until then, it was debt backed by company assets. There were audit rights every quarter. Any transaction over $50,000 required dual authorization. If funds were misused, I had the right to recall the capital and initiate legal action. We filed a UCC-1 financing statement to perfect the security interest. Everything documented, everything signed. She signed without hesitation. At the time, she called me her guardian angel. I wired the funds the following Monday. The effect was immediate. High-interest debt cleared. Payroll stabilized. Vendors resumed normal terms. Employees stopped whispering about layoffs. Within 18 months, the company was profitable again. She secured contracts with mid-sized tech companies in Texas, rebranded retail chains, regional campaigns that brought in steady revenue. It wasn't a miracle. It was breathing room and disciplined spending. For a while, she was grateful. She invited me to speak to her team about financial discipline. She publicly thanked me during a small company event. My parents bragged about how both their daughters were high achievers, just in different ways. Then the tone shifted. It started subtly. She stopped mentioning the loan during interviews. When a local business magazine profiled her company, the article described her as bootstrapping her agency through sheer determination. Bootstrapping is an interesting word when you wire $3 million. I didn't call her out publicly. I didn't comment on the article. I assumed it was marketing language. But the more revenue grew, the more the narrative changed. She upgraded her car, moved into a higher-end condo in Austin, started posting photos from conferences and networking events with captions about building from nothing. Nothing. The contract still existed. The debt still existed. The repayment schedule still existed. It just became inconvenient to acknowledge. When I reminded her once during a private conversation that the loan was still outstanding, she waved it off. Relax. The company's worth way more now. Worth doesn't repay secured debt. I wasn't asking for early repayment. I was asking for transparency. Quarterly audits were still happening, at least on paper. Back in North Carolina, my life stayed steady. PT at 0600. Budget reviews, staff meetings, clearance compliance updates, routine financial disclosures. Everything documented because that's how the Army works. You don't get to ignore paperwork because it doesn't fit your story. Looking back, the money wasn't the real risk. The real risk was believing that gratitude lasts longer than ego. That afternoon, as Ethan closed the folder on the kitchen table, he didn't need to say what we both understood. The agreement had protected us once. Now it was about to do it again. The next time I flew to Texas, her office looked twice the size. Glass walls, new logo, more staff. The kind of place that smells like fresh paint and confidence. Samantha walked me through the space like she'd built it with her bare hands. Different world from last time, right? It was. Revenue had climbed steadily for 3 consecutive years. She had landed contracts with 2 regional tech companies and a retail chain expanding across the Southwest. The books, at least on the surface, showed real growth. And to her credit, she worked hard. She networked constantly. She knew how to pitch. She knew how to present herself. She understood optics. That's when the word started appearing more often. Self-made. At first it showed up casually in captions, then in interviews, then in podcast appearances. I started with nothing, she told one host. I was sitting at my desk at Fort Liberty when I heard that clip. Nothing is an interesting term when you start with $3 million in secured capital. My parents loved the attention. They shared every article. My mom framed a print copy of a local business feature titled Austin's Rising Female Founder. I didn't ask to be mentioned. I didn't need public credit. But the narrative shift wasn't neutral. It was deliberate. At Thanksgiving that year, the difference became obvious. We gathered at my parents' house in Plano. Standard setup, too much food, too much noise, Too many opinions about politics. Nobody fully understands. Samantha arrived late as usual. She drove a new Mercedes that she insisted was a business necessity. She walked in with a designer coat and a confidence level that filled the room. Within 15 minutes, she had the entire table listening to her latest contract win. 7 figures, she said, cutting into her turkey. All organic growth. Organic. My dad leaned back in his chair. That's what happens when you're willing to take real risks. I focused on my plate. My mom smiled at me across the table. Tori's doing great too, of course. But you know, government jobs are stable, not exactly entrepreneurial. Government jobs. I had just come back from a training rotation supporting units deploying overseas. I managed budgets that dwarfed my sister's annual revenue. I handled funds that required congressional oversight. Stability wasn't small. It was responsible. Samantha sipped her wine. It's just a different mindset. Some people are wired to build. Others are wired to maintain. That was the first time I looked up. Maintain what I asked calmly. She shrugged. Systems, rules, structure. I had to build everything from scratch. There it was again. From scratch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't embarrass her. I simply said, "The company's still carrying the secured debt, Sam. It's not scratch." The table went quiet. My dad set his fork down harder than necessary. We're not doing this. Doing what I asked. Turning dinner into a financial audit. I wasn't auditing. I was stating a fact. My mom jumped in quickly. She's just proud of what she's accomplished. Can't you let her have that? Have what? A narrative that deleted $3 million. Samantha didn't argue the numbers. She didn't deny the loan. She just smiled. It's handled. The company's worth more than enough now. You're not at risk. That word again. Risk. The only reason I wasn't at risk was because the agreement protected me. Because I insisted on it. I let it go that night. Not because I agreed. Because arguing in a dining room full of relatives changes nothing. On the flight back to North Carolina, I reviewed the most recent quarterly statement on my tablet. Revenue strong. Expenses higher than I preferred, but within tolerances. Nothing that clearly violated the agreement. Still, something felt off. Not illegal, not yet, just casual. The dual signature requirement for transactions over $50,000 had been used less frequently. More payments were landing just under that threshold. Marketing expenses labeled broadly. Vendor names I didn't recognize. Individually, none of it triggered immediate action. Collectively, it suggested looseness. Back at Fort Liberty, my schedule didn't slow down. Budget planning season, mid-year reviews, compliance briefings, my own financial disclosures updated annually to maintain clearance. Transparency is not optional in the Army. You disclose outside business interests, investments, civil liabilities, anything that could create vulnerability. Family drama counts if it affects financial exposure. That's the part my parents never considered. If Samantha's company collapsed publicly under debt again, and I was tied to it financially, it wouldn't just be Thanksgiving tension. It would be a clearance conversation. When I mentioned that, once my mom waved it off, "You worry too much. She's successful now." Success is not the same thing as discipline. Over the next year, Samantha's public persona grew louder. She launched a small podcast. She spoke on panels about bootstrapping through adversity. She began describing the early near bankruptcy as a learning phase before scaling organically. The loan became a footnote she never read aloud. Then came the article that finally changed my tolerance level. A regional business journal quoted her saying, "I never relied on investors. I wanted full control from day one." Full control. That wasn't marketing language anymore. That was false. Ethan read the article over breakfast. He didn't react immediately. He just asked, "Have you reviewed Q3 yet?" "I was planning to tonight." "Let's not wait." That evening, we logged into the portal and pulled the detailed transaction ledger instead of the summary statement. The surface looked fine. Revenue in, expenses out, net positive. But patterns don't show up in summaries. They show up in repetition. We started sorting transactions by vendor. That's when the first vendor name appeared twice under slightly different spellings. Same address, different invoice numbers, amounts just under $50,000. I didn't feel angry. I felt alert, because ego is one thing, but patterns are another. I turned my laptop toward Ethan and pointed at the vendor line item. Look at the address. He leaned closer. Same street, same suite number, 2 different company names. Payments spaced 3 weeks apart, each one under $50,000. That wasn't an accident. The dual authorization clause in our agreement required both signatures for any outgoing payment above $50,000. Split it into 49 and change, and it clears without triggering oversight. Individually, it looks normal. Repeated 5, 6, 7 times, it stops looking normal. We exported the ledger into Excel and sorted by EIN numbers. 2 of the vendors shared the same EIN. That's not creative accounting. That's sloppy. Ethan pulled up the Texas Secretary of State database. He searched the vendor name. No results. He searched variations. Nothing. Then he searched the registered agent address. That's when the Delaware LLC appeared. Different company name. Same registered agent. Same mailing address used by the marketing consultants receiving payments from Samantha's agency. Delaware is common for legitimate businesses. It's also common for shell entities. We pulled the public filing. Manager Samantha Whitaker. She didn't even try to hide ownership. The transfers weren't massive. That's what made them dangerous. $38,000 here, $42,000 there. 50 minus a few dollars repeatedly. Over 6 months, the total crossed into 6 figures. I didn't jump to conclusions. There are legitimate reasons for affiliated entities. But those reasons require disclosure, especially under a secured debt agreement with fiduciary duties. There had been no disclosure. We traced one of the outgoing wires further. It landed in a brokerage account. The brokerage account was under Samantha's name. That removed any ambiguity. She wasn't mislabeling vendor payments to manage cash flow. She was redirecting funds. The money wasn't vanishing. It was moving. Total exposure so far, I asked. Ethan ran the pivot table again. Just under $400,000 over 9 months. $400,000 diverted without disclosure. Not catastrophic in a $3 million structure, but enough to qualify as breach. I leaned back in my chair. 6 years earlier, she called me her guardian angel. Now she was routing secured capital through an LLC she controlled. There's a difference between optimism and entitlement. This felt like entitlement. We printed everything. Highlighted transaction IDs, matched dates, documented routing numbers. We built a timeline, not an accusation. The next morning before PT1 called Bennett. I need you to review something I said. By noon, he had copies of the ledger extracts and the Delaware filing. He didn't dramatize it. If these are unauthorized related party transactions, you're within your rights to issue a formal notice of breach. What does that trigger? Cure period. 10 business days. She either provides documentation proving legitimacy or you escalate. Escalate how? TRO. Asset freeze pending judicial review. There it was. Not revenge, not punishment, process. That afternoon, I sat through a battalion finance meeting discussing projected expenditures for the next quarter. The colonel talked about fiscal discipline and oversight responsibility. I took notes like always. The irony didn't escape me. In uniform, I oversee public funds with strict accountability. At home, I was watching private capital move through shell entities. That night, we reviewed the agreement again. Section 4.3. No undisclosed related party transactions. Section 6.1. Material breach permits immediate recall and legal remedy. It wasn't vague. We drafted the notice of breach carefully. No emotion, just facts. Identified transactions, dates, amounts, registered entity ownership. Reference to agreement clauses. 10 business days to cure. The letter went out certified and electronically. 3 days passed, no response. 5 days, nothing. On day 6, Samantha posted photos from a networking event in Dallas. Panel discussion about women building wealth without outside help. Without outside help. I forwarded the post to Ethan. He didn't comment. He didn't need to. On day 8, our attorney received a short email from Samantha's counsel acknowledging receipt of the notice and stating they were reviewing internally. No documentation attached. Day 10 arrived. Still no accounting. Under the agreement, failure to cure within the specified period allowed us to initiate legal action. I didn't pull the trigger immediately. Instead, we ran one more transaction analysis for the period after the notice had been delivered. There were 2 additional payments to the Delaware LLC. Same pattern, just under 50,000. That detail mattered because it showed knowledge. She knew there was a dispute. She moved funds anyway. That's not a misunderstanding. That's willful disregard. Ethan closed his laptop and looked at me. She thinks you won't enforce it. He wasn't accusing. He was observing. For years, I had chosen peace over friction. At holidays, at family gatherings, I avoided turning conversations into spreadsheets. But this wasn't a holiday conversation anymore. It was fiduciary responsibility. The next morning, I emailed Bennett a single line, proceed with escalation. He responded within the hour. Draft TRO ready. Filing planned for early next week to ensure compliance coordination with the bank. The mechanics were straightforward. File petition in Travis County alleging breach of contract and fiduciary duty. Request temporary restraining order to prevent further dissipation of assets. Notify financial institution holding the primary operating account. Trigger internal compliance hold. Nothing cinematic, just structured. That weekend, Samantha posted a teaser on social media, hinting at a major personal announcement. Comments filled with guesses. Acquisition, expansion, investment round. I didn't speculate. By then the evidence was organized. The agreement was clear. The cure period had expired. Additional funds had moved after notice. That wasn't a family disagreement. It was documented breach. And documentation carries weight. I scheduled a meeting with our unit security manager before I filed anything else. That wasn't about family. That was about my clearance. When you hold a sensitive clearance in the Army, you don't wait for problems to surface. You disclose early. Financial disputes, civil litigation outside business interests, anything that could create leverage or vulnerability. The last thing I needed was someone asking why I failed to mention a lawsuit tied to a $3 million investment. The security office at Fort Liberty is not dramatic. Beige walls, metal filing cabinets, a framed reminder about reporting obligations. I knocked, stepped inside, and closed the door. I need to report a pending civil dispute involving a personal investment, I said. No emotion. Just facts. He pulled up my file and asked standard questions. Amount involved. $3 million originally. Approximately $400,000 in disputed transactions. Nature of dispute. Alleged breach of secured debt agreement. Potential civil litigation in Texas. Any criminal allegations? No. Any indication of personal financial distress on my end? No. I provided copies of the agreement, the notice of breach, and documentation showing I was the secured creditor, not the debtor. That distinction matters. Clearance reviews are triggered by financial instability, hidden liabilities, or undisclosed conflicts. I wasn't hiding anything. I wasn't overextended. I wasn't desperate. I was enforcing a contract. He made notes and nodded. You did the right thing reporting this early, he said. As long as you remain financially stable and transparent, this shouldn't affect your eligibility. Shouldn't. That word stayed with me. Back in my office, I stared at my email inbox longer than necessary. Samantha probably believed this was just family friction. A disagreement about control. Something that could be smoothed over at the next holiday dinner. She didn't understand that once legal filings begin, the ripple effects extend beyond feelings. They reach institutions. That afternoon, my colonel called me into his office. Security flagged a pending civil matter tied to you, he said without accusation. Yes, sir. I summarized the situation in under 2 minutes. Investment, secured debt, alleged misuse, pending civil enforcement. He listened without interruption. You personally in financial trouble? No, sir. Any risk of public scandal affecting the unit? Unlikely, sir. It's a private business dispute. He leaned back. Handle it professionally. Don't let it bleed into work. Yes, sir. That was it. No lecture. No suspicion. Just a reminder that discipline doesn't stop at the gate. When I left his office, I felt something settle into place. This wasn't about proving Samantha wrong. It was about protecting my own record. That evening, Ethan and I reviewed the latest transaction data again. The 2 post-notice transfers still bothered me. She moved money after receiving formal breach notification, he said. That strengthens your position. It also strengthens the argument for immediate restraining relief. We weren't trying to bankrupt her. We were trying to stop further diversion. There's a difference. On Saturday, my mom called. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message anyway. Your sister is under a lot of pressure. If this is about the audit letter, can't you just talk to her? Talk to her. We had talked for years. Conversations don't override contractual obligations. Sunday afternoon, another message came through, this time from Samantha. You're blowing this out of proportion. It's internal accounting. Don't embarrass the family. Embarrassment. That word gets used a lot when accountability shows up. I didn't respond. Instead, I reviewed this draft TRO petition Bennett had prepared. It outlined the secured debt agreement, the identified related party transactions, the failure to cure, and the risk of continued asset dissipation. It requested a temporary restraining order, preventing further transfers from the primary operating account and prohibiting asset movement pending judicial review. No accusations of fraud, no dramatic language, just documented breach. Monday morning, before a PT1 reread the petition one more time. 6 years earlier, I wired $3 million believing I was helping family rebuild. Now I was reading legal language about restraining orders and fiduciary violations. Same money, different context. The irony wasn't lost on me. Later that day, while I was reviewing quarterly projections for the battalion, my phone vibrated with another social media notification. Samantha had posted again. This time it was a short video inside what looked like a luxury showroom. White floors, glass walls, sales staff in branded polos. Caption: Big Day. Dream achieved. Couldn't have done it without grit. No investors mentioned. No secured debt referenced. Just grit. I muted the app and focused back on my spreadsheet. Numbers don't lie. They just wait for someone to read them correctly. That night I stood in the kitchen while Ethan prepared dinner. You sure about this? He asked, not as doubt but as confirmation. If I don't enforce the agreement, I said, then it was never real. He nodded. In the Army, rules are only respected if they're applied consistently. At home, it turns out the same principle applies. My phone lit up again before dinner was even finished. Samantha. I let it ring once, then answered. Her voice was tight, controlled. Not yelling, not yet. What exactly are you trying to do? Enforce the agreement. This is ridiculous. You're acting like I stole from you. I'm acting like there are related party transactions that weren't disclosed. A pause. It's internal restructuring. Then provide documentation. Another pause. Longer this time. You don't understand how businesses operate at this level. That line almost made me laugh. I manage federal funds under congressional oversight. I understand how documentation works. I understand fiduciary duty, I said. Her tone shifted. Sharper. You're overreacting. Those transfers were strategic. I'm consolidating assets. It's my company. Secured debt doesn't disappear because revenue improves. It's not solely your company, I said. It's encumbered. You're not running it. I am. I control the accounts. Ethan was across the room, silent. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. Texas is a one-party consent state for recording calls. I had already placed the phone on speaker and started recording the moment she said ridiculous. I control the accounts. That sentence mattered. Control doesn't eliminate obligations, I replied. You don't get to threaten me with legal action every time I move money. Moving money to an LLC you own without disclosure is not routine. Silence. Then she said it. It's my right to allocate funds how I see fit. Not company funds, just funds. That was enough. We ended the call without yelling. No slammed phones, just a quiet disconnect. Ethan stopped the recording and saved the file immediately. Clear admission of authority over the disputed transfers, he said. And no denial of ownership of the LLC. I forwarded the audio file to Bennett. Within an hour, he called back. This strengthens your petition, he said. She acknowledged control and allocation of funds after notice of breach. That's helpful. Helpful is attorney language for damaging. The next morning, my mom called. I answered this time. She's stressed, my mom said immediately. You know how public perception matters in her industry. Public perception. Contracts matter too, I replied. She's building something bigger than you realize. I realized it when I wired $3 million. My mom went quiet. You could just give her time. She had time. What are you trying to prove? That agreements mean something, she sighed. You've always been so rigid. Rigid. In the Army, rigid means reliable. After I hung up, I reviewed the updated draft of the TRO petition. Bennett had added references to Samantha's recorded statements regarding control and allocation of funds post-breach notice. The language remained measured. No emotional adjectives, just citations. Later that afternoon, while I was reviewing budget projections with my team, my phone buzzed again. A text from Samantha. Don't file anything. We can settle this privately. Settle. That implied acknowledgement. If you provide full accounting and reverse the transfers I typed back, we can discuss resolution. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No response. By then, the hearing date had been tentatively scheduled for later in the week. The bank had been informed that litigation was imminent. Their compliance department had already placed a soft flag on the primary operating account pending court direction. That's how financial institutions protect themselves. They don't wait for headlines. That evening, Samantha posted another photo. Inside a Tesla showroom. Close-up of the steering wheel. Caption, "Hard work pays off." The comment section filled quickly. Self-made queen. Goals. My dad commented with a flame emoji and "proud of you." I closed the app. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time her voice wasn't controlled. "What did you tell the bank?" "Nothing inaccurate. They're saying the account is under review." "It is. You're humiliating me." "Humiliation isn't created by review. It's created by exposure." "You had a cure period," I said. "You're doing this because you're jealous." Jealousy is easier to accuse than breach. If you believe that I replied, you can argue it in court. She exhaled sharply. "You wouldn't dare." I didn't respond to that, because by then the paperwork was already moving. The following morning, Bennett filed the petition electronically in Travis County. The TRO request cited breach of contract, undisclosed related party transactions, and risk of continued dissipation of secured assets. The bank's compliance hold escalated from soft flag to active suspension of outgoing transactions pending review. No sirens, no dramatic freezes, just internal systems doing what they're designed to do. At 10:15 a.m. Central Time, according to the transaction log, a charge attempt was made at a Tesla dealership in Austin. Amount significant. Status declined. 2 minutes later, another attempt. Declined. At 10:23 a.m., my phone buzzed with a transaction alert forwarded by Ethan. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just showed me the screen. Account under review. Transaction not authorized. Across the country in a polished showroom with bright lights and polished floors, my sister was probably holding a piece of plastic that no longer worked. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and walked into my next meeting. The spreadsheet in front of me didn't change. The numbers stayed balanced. Outside that room, other numbers were finally doing the same. I kept my phone face down during the meeting. When it ended, I stepped into the hallway and checked the call log. 5 missed calls from Samantha. 2 from my mom. 1 from my dad. No voicemail from any of them. That told me they were still in public. Ethan texted. She tried again. Same result. Account access fully suspended. Fully suspended meant the bank had escalated from transaction review to temporary restriction pending court review. That doesn't happen because someone feels offended. It happens because a legal filing references secured debt and asset dissipation. By the time I drove home, Samantha had switched from calling to texting. "What did you tell them?" "Fix this. You're going to regret this." Threats are interesting when they come from someone who just lost account access. I didn't respond. At 6:14 p.m., Bennett forwarded confirmation that the TRO had been accepted for emergency consideration. Hearing set for later that week. Until then, the compliance hold would remain active. He added one line. Given post-notice transfers and recorded admission position is strong. Strong is attorney language for defensible. Around 7 p.m., my mom finally left a voicemail. She's at the dealership. People are staring. They're saying the account is frozen. Can you just call the bank and clear this up? Clear this up. That phrasing suggested misunderstanding. There wasn't any. The account wasn't frozen because of a glitch. It was suspended because of documented breach and pending judicial review. Ethan looked at me across the living room. "You don't have to listen to those," he said. "I know." I deleted the voicemail without saving it. The next morning, Samantha posted nothing. Silence on social media is louder than any caption. At 8:30 a.m., I received an email from her attorney. Subject line urgent. Account suspension. The message argued that the compliance hold was causing irreparable reputational harm and requested immediate withdrawal of the TRO petition. No mention of the related party transfers. No documentation explaining the Delaware LLC. Just urgency. I forwarded it to Bennett. His reply came quickly. Reputational harm does not override contractual breach. We proceed. In parallel, I updated my security manager with a short email noting that formal civil action had now been filed and a hearing scheduled. Transparency isn't dramatic. It's protective. By midday, Samantha tried a different angle. She called Ethan. He answered on speaker. "This is going too far," she said. "The dealership thinks I don't have the funds. You moved secured funds without disclosure." Ethan replied evenly. "It's my company. It's encumbered. You're humiliating me in front of clients. The compliance hold was triggered by your transactions after notice." Silence. Then she shifted tone. "Let's settle this privately. I'll pay you back." "You don't get to convert secured debt into casual repayment after breach," Ethan said. "The agreement outlines procedure. Procedure is not flexible once invoked." By late afternoon, local chatter had started. Not headlines, just whispers in the Austin business circle. A founder whose company account was suddenly under review draws attention. Nothing spreads faster than uncertainty around money. My parents called again that evening. This time my dad spoke. "You've made your point. I didn't file to make a point. You embarrassed her. She breached the agreement. You could have handled it differently, by ignoring it." He didn't answer that. Instead, he asked, "Are you trying to shut her down?" "No." "Then what are you trying to do?" "Stop unauthorized transfers." There's a difference between destruction and enforcement. One is emotional. The other is contractual. The following day, the bank sent formal notice to Samantha's company, confirming temporary suspension of outgoing transactions pending legal review. Incoming funds were still allowed. Payroll could continue under restricted approval. This wasn't annihilation. It was containment. By noon, Samantha texted, "The board is asking questions." Good. Boards are supposed to ask questions when secured creditors file restraining orders. That afternoon, Bennett updated us. Opposing counsel had filed a response arguing that the Delaware LLC transactions were strategic internal allocations. They provided no invoices, no service descriptions, no independent valuation of work performed. Internal allocations do not eliminate disclosure requirements under secured debt. Ethan printed their response and highlighted every missing document. "It's thin," he said. "Thin is not what you want your legal defense described as." That night I reviewed my own financial disclosure forms for the year. Every outside investment listed. Every liability documented. No surprises. That's the difference between military compliance and entrepreneurial storytelling. One tolerates no ambiguity. On Friday morning, Samantha sent one final message before the weekend. "You think this makes you powerful?" Power isn't what I felt. Control, maybe. Stability, alignment, but not power. What I felt was balance. For years, she had controlled the narrative, the interviews, the captions, the panels about grit and independence. Now documentation controlled the situation. Later that afternoon, Ethan received a notification from the bank's compliance portal. Attempted login to the business account from an unrecognized IP address. Access denied. Multiple attempts. Denied. I pictured her refreshing the dashboard, waiting for numbers to reappear. Numbers don't respond to frustration. They respond to authority. And at that moment, authority no longer came from a showroom floor or a podcast microphone. It came from a contract filed 6 years earlier and enforced exactly as written. The knock on my front door came just after sunset. Not hesitant, not polite, firm enough to make a point. Ethan glanced at the security camera feed on his phone before I even stood up. "They're here." Sam stood on the porch with her arms crossed. My parents flanked her like backup singers who didn't know the lyrics. I opened the door but didn't invite them in immediately. "What are you doing?" Sam asked, walking past me without waiting for an answer. She looked smaller in my living room than she did in the Tesla showroom photos. My mom followed, already emotional. My dad stayed quiet, scanning the room like he expected to find a switch I could flip to reverse everything. Ethan closed the door calmly behind them. Sam didn't sit. "You need to call your lawyer," she said. "Right now." "For what?" "To withdraw the petition." "This is insane." "What part?" "The account freeze. Clients are asking questions. Vendors are nervous. Then provide documentation explaining the related party transfers." She threw her hands up. "It's internal allocation. To an LLC you own. That's normal. Then disclose it." Silence hung there for a moment. My mom stepped forward. "This is tearing the family apart." "No," I said evenly. "The undisclosed transfers did that." Sam laughed once, sharp and short. "You think this makes you superior because you wear a uniform and follow rules? This has nothing to do with the Army." "Everything with you has to do with the Army." She wasn't entirely wrong. Discipline follows you home whether you want it to or not. I walked to the kitchen table and pulled out the binder Ethan had assembled earlier in the week. Copies of the agreement. ledger extracts, highlighted transaction trails. The Delaware filing listing her as manager. I placed it on the table between us. Show me the invoices, I said. There are no invoices. It's strategic movement. That's not how secured debt works. My dad finally spoke. You could have handled this privately. I did. 10-day cure period. No documentation. Continued transfers. He looked at the binder like it might start arguing back. Sam leaned closer. You embarrassed me in front of a dealership full of people. The bank suspended transactions pending review. You triggered it. I triggered enforcement. There's a difference. She shook her head. You've always needed control. No, I said. I needed transparency. Ethan stayed silent, but his presence in the room mattered. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't defensive. Just steady. My mom's voice cracked. She bought that car for your father. With secured funds, I replied. Funds you weren't using. That's not how secured capital works. Silence again. Sam's tone shifted, not angry now, but frustrated. What do you want? I want compliance. What does that mean in real terms? Full accounting. Immediate reversal of unauthorized transfers. Board acknowledgement of breach. Structured repayment schedule reaffirmed. Independent audit moving forward. She stared at me. You're treating me like a criminal. I'm treating you like a debtor under contract. The words didn't sound harsh when I said them. They sounded accurate. My dad sank into a chair. This doesn't have to go to court. It already has, Ethan said quietly. Sam's jaw tightened. If this goes public, it's a civil matter, I said. Filed in Travis County. Not a press conference. She paced once across the living room. You think clients won't find out? Clients find out when financial controls collapse. They don't find out when contracts are enforced. My mom wiped her eyes. We raised you better than this. You raised me to keep my word, I replied. The room went quiet in a different way after that. Sam picked up the binder and flipped through the pages quickly as if speed would erase what was printed. She stopped at the Delaware filing. You pulled public records. Yes. You don't trust me. Trust doesn't override documentation. That landed. She closed the binder slowly. What if I agree to reverse everything she asked? You can submit documentation to your attorney, I said. He can present it formally. Formally, she repeated like the word offended her. That's the problem with structure. It feels cold to people who prefer flexibility. My dad stood up. We drove across 2 states for this. And you're still here, I said calmly. Sam looked at Ethan. You're behind this. He didn't flinch. I reviewed numbers. That's not an answer. It is. She let out a long breath and glanced toward the door. This isn't over, she said. That depends on compliance. She moved toward the entryway. My parents followed more slowly. At the door, my mom turned back. She's your sister. I know. And you're really going to let a contract define this? It already did. Ethan opened the door for them. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just 3 people walking out of a house where the rules weren't negotiable. When the door closed, the house felt quiet again. Not victorious, balanced. I wore my Army service uniform to the hearing. Not to intimidate anyone, not to make a statement. It was a work day, and I had taken leave to appear remotely from North Carolina, while our attorney attended in person in Travis County. But I stayed in uniform on the video call. Discipline doesn't take off for convenience. The judge reviewed the petition, the breach notice, the related party transfers, and the audio transcript of Samantha acknowledging control over the funds after receiving formal notice. Opposing counsel argued that the transfers were internal capital structuring. The judge asked one simple question. Were these related party transactions disclosed to the secured creditor as required under the agreement? Silence on their side lasted longer than it should have. That was enough for the temporary restraining order to remain in place pending further proceedings. No dramatic gavel slam, just procedure. After the hearing, discovery began in earnest. Subpoenas for financial records, deposition scheduling, formal document requests. When you move from family argument to civil litigation, emotions become irrelevant. Paper matters. Dates matter. Transfers matter. Over the next 3 months, forensic accountants traced the diverted funds completely. The Delaware LLC had received multiple structured payments. From there, funds had been routed to Samantha's brokerage account and used for personal expenditures, luxury lease payments, travel, a substantial down payment attempt for the Tesla. Nothing criminal on its face, just clear breach of fiduciary obligations under secured debt. That distinction matters. Fraud cases go to prosecutors. breach cases, go to settlement tables. During her deposition, Samantha admitted she did not formally disclose the related party entity to me as required. She claimed it was understood. Understanding is not documentation. Her board began asking harder questions. Vendors tightened payment terms. Clients requested assurance letters confirming operational stability. Reputation in business doesn't collapse in a single moment. It erodes when confidence does. Eventually, opposing counsel requested mediation. That's when reality usually enters the room. The settlement terms were straightforward. The company would liquidate non-essential assets and restructure under new management. A portion of client contracts would be sold. The proceeds would first satisfy the secured debt obligation, including accrued legal fees. Samantha would step down as CEO immediately. She agreed not to serve as an officer or director in the restructured entity for 5 years as part of the settlement agreement. Not a criminal penalty, a negotiated condition. The $3 million were repaid in full along with documented legal costs. No prison, no headlines, no FBI raid, just consequences written in clean legal language. When the judge approved the settlement, I felt something I didn't expect. Not satisfaction, stability. The agreement had been tested and held. A week later, I updated my security manager again. I provided the settlement documentation showing full repayment and closure of the civil dispute. No outstanding liabilities. No unresolved exposure. Looks clean, he said after reviewing the paperwork. Appreciate the transparency. That word again. Transparency. At work, nothing changed. I still showed up at 0600. Still reviewed budgets. Still signed off on expense approvals. My evaluation that quarter mentioned consistent judgment under pressure. Pressure is easier to handle when the rules are clear. Back in Texas, things shifted. Samantha moved out of her downtown Austin condo and into a smaller rental. The Mercedes lease was terminated early. Staff turnover accelerated during the restructuring phase. Clients who valued brand confidence quietly transitioned elsewhere. My parents stopped posting business articles. The Tesla never appeared in the driveway. We didn't speak for several weeks. Then one afternoon my dad called. His voice sounded older. "It's done," he asked. "Yes. She's not running this company anymore." "No." A pause. "She says you destroyed her." "I enforced a contract." Another pause. "You don't regret it?" "No." He exhaled slowly. "We thought she was unstoppable." "Nothing is unstoppable, especially not paperwork." Later that evening, Samantha sent a single email. Subject line: settlement. No accusation. No anger. Just acknowledgement that the funds had been transferred and the terms accepted. At the bottom, she wrote, "You win." Winning was never the objective. If I had wanted to win, I would have gone public. I would have shared the documentation. I would have responded to every self-made post with transaction IDs. I didn't, because enforcement is not performance. It's quiet. Months later, I ran into an old colleague of Samantha's at a conference in Raleigh. He mentioned casually that her agency had restructured. Business language for correction. No one mentioned the Tesla. Back at Fort Liberty, I stood in formation during a promotion ceremony for another officer. The flag moved in the breeze. The cadence of orders remained steady. Institutional systems survive because they're built on rules that apply whether convenient or not. Family systems apparently require the same thing. When I got home that evening, Ethan was reviewing quarterly statements for our own investments. He looked up and asked, "Anything new?" "No." And for the first time in months, that was true. The account balances were correct. The obligations were satisfied. The illusion had expired on its own. The doorbell rang on a Saturday afternoon while I was cleaning out the garage. Ethan checked the camera first. "It's them." I wiped my hands on a towel and walked inside. My parents stood on the porch. No Samantha this time. I opened the door. They didn't look angry. They looked tired. "Can we come in?" my mom asked. I stepped aside. They sat at the kitchen table where the binder had once been. The same table where contracts had replaced arguments. For a minute, nobody spoke. My dad finally cleared his throat. "Things are different." I didn't respond. I waited. "She had to sell the condo," my mom said quietly. "The restructuring didn't leave much room." "That was part of the agreement," I replied. "She's trying to rebuild." "I hope she does." That wasn't sarcasm, I meant it. My dad looked at me directly. "You could help." "With what?" "She's your sister." There it was again. The automatic override button labeled family. "I already helped," I said. "You know what I mean." "I do." And the answer is no. Silence settled in again, but this time it wasn't tense. It was heavy. My mom folded her hands. We didn't realize how serious the contract was. I told you it was secured. We thought it was just paperwork. Paperwork is what separates intention from obligation. She called herself self-made, my dad said. We believed it. I know. And when the bank declined that payment, he stopped. I finished the sentence for him. It wasn't the bank. It was the agreement. He nodded slowly. My mom looked around the house. You've done well for yourself. I followed structure. You've always been like that. Disciplined, predictable, rigid. In the army, those are compliments. My dad leaned forward. She says you humiliated her. I didn't call the dealership. You filed the petition. Yes. And you don't feel bad. I feel clear. That answer seemed to land harder than anger would have. My mom's voice softened. She's struggling. So did I said. They both looked up. When I was deployed, when I built my portfolio, when I signed that agreement. I carried risk quietly. No applause. No interviews. I wasn't raising my voice. Just stating reality. She chose visibility, I continued. I chose documentation. My dad exhaled. She thought the success meant the debt didn't matter anymore. That's not how secured capital works. We sat there for a long moment. Finally, my mom asked the question she'd been circling. If she asks you for help again? No. No explanation. No lecture. Just no. Not because I hate her. Not because I want her to fail. Because enforcement once means enforcement always. My dad nodded slowly. I guess we misread the situation. You misread the contract. A faint, almost reluctant smile crossed his face at that. They stood to leave a few minutes later. At the door, my mom paused. We were proud of her because she looked fearless. Fearless isn't the same as accountable. She didn't argue. When the door closed, the house felt quiet again. Ethan stepped into the hallway. You okay? Yes. I wasn't replaying the Tesla moment anymore. That had already done its work. I wasn't thinking about the showroom, or the declined transaction, or the social media posts. What stayed with me wasn't the humiliation. It was the clarity. Over the next few weeks, things stabilized. Samantha stopped posting about entrepreneurship. Her social media shifted to neutral updates. Travel photos. Generic motivational quotes. Nothing about being self-made. My parents adjusted too. Less commentary. Fewer comparisons. At work, I received my annual evaluation. Strong marks. Recommendation for promotion. No mention of personal litigation beyond the standard clearance documentation. Life moved the way it does when structure holds. One evening, months later, I was reviewing our own quarterly investment statements when Ethan glanced up from his screen. You ever think about what would have happened if you didn't enforce it? Yes. And she would have kept moving money. He nodded. Sometimes he said people don't learn until a system pushes back. I closed the laptop. Self-made is a powerful phrase. It sounds independent, strong, untouchable. But self-made only works when the foundation is yours. If the capital is secured, if the risk is shared, if the agreement is signed and filed, then the story belongs to more than one person. I didn't ruin my sister. I didn't call the bank and ask them to embarrass her. I didn't stand in the showroom. I enforced a contract that she signed willingly. She called herself a self-made millionaire. All I did was remove what wasn't hers. Looking back, the Tesla moment wasn't really about a car or even about money. It was about accountability. In a lot of family revenge stories, people expect shouting dramatic confrontations or someone losing everything overnight. Real life doesn't usually work like that. Real consequences show up through contracts, documentation, and systems doing exactly what they're designed to do. My sister called herself a self-made millionaire. I didn't argue with her online. I didn't expose her publicly. I followed the agreement we both signed. In the end, this wasn't just family drama. It was a reminder that discipline applies everywhere in the military and business and inside your own home. If something is built on borrowed structure, it isn't self-made. And if you ignore boundaries long enough, they eventually enforce themselves. If you enjoy real-life revenge stories, especially military family revenge stories rooted in contracts, accountability, and hard choices, make sure you subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more to unpack about family money and what happens when discipline meets drama.